Hi guys, and welcome once again to Piano and Keyboard Artist, where we discuss great artists related to pianos, keyboards and synthesizers. And today's here, it's the long-awaited Depeche Mode album review series, kicking off with my review of Speak and Spell. Before we jump into today's album review, I just want to give you a bit of background as to how we're going to conduct these album review series. Obviously we're starting with Speak and Spell, and we're going to move chronologically through all the Depeche Mode albums and finally end up on their most recent album, Spirit. If you're a regular subscriber to my channel, you will know that I've also started an interview series with the legendary photographer Brian Griffin. And of course, Brian Griffin was the man who photographed all Depeche Mode's albums, all the way from Speak and Spell to Black Celebration. So that series with Brian Griffin is going to run in tandem or in parallel with this album review series. So in this album review series, we're going to go through each album in a lot of detail, in a very free-flowing kind of way. As you guys know, I'd just like you to feel like you're sitting in a room with me here and we're just two friends discussing a subject we love. So we're unscripted, it's just free love. So unlike many album review series where the reviewer will probably just talk about the album and the songs from the perspective of a fan, I want to give my perspective not only as a fan, but also as I want to add my 2 cents worth of input as a producer. That does not mean I know what I'm talking about, but it does give me a different perspective. We will also discuss some of the keyboards and the synthesizers that were used, and also just some of the general history which was relevant to the making of the album at the time. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through some of the songs and illustrate some of the parts. So we're going to have a lot of fun. And then at the end, what I'm going to do is I've got 5 questions or 5 points I want to make. And the first question will be, if I was to lose a song from the album, which song would it be? The second point would be, I want to let you know which I think is the most radical track on the album. And what I mean by most radical, it doesn't mean which is my most favorite song. It just means which song is the most sort of like radical, you know, sort of as far as production, or it stands out as a radical track. The third point would be, which song have I listened to the most? Meaning, since I've had this album, what song do I think I've listened to the most on the album? And the fourth point will be, which song do I currently like the most on this album? Because sometimes, you know, with a lot of albums, you may like all the songs, but your taste changes over the years and you find yourself liking a song more over the years or less or whatever. And of course the final point will be the album review or the album rating, where I'm going to give it a mark out of 10. Now when I score these albums, guys, bear in mind there are many mitigating factors that come into play here. For instance, let me give you an example. If a child went to court for a crime, you would not judge a child the same way you would judge an adult, obviously, because there are mitigating factors that come into play. And how that bears relevance to this album review series is, I'm not going to criticize this album as critically as what I would say criticize some of the more recent albums, obviously, because you've got to bear in mind the mitigating factors that this was a debut album, you know, they were just trying to find their way. So you get the point. I'm going to be less brutal on this, and that makes sense because they were very inexperienced at the time. Effectively, this means that when the review is over and I give a score, I will be able to back up the reasons why I give that score. So if I give an album, let's say 4 out of 10, for instance, if you ask me, Vaughan, why did you give 4 out of 10? I can actually back it up. And of course, it's just my opinion, and you may or may not agree with me. As I say, there are many factors that come into play when reviewing an individual album, and they cannot be all judged in the same way, if that makes any sense. Right, guys, Speak and Spell. Let's jump into it. Right, so I've got my lovely reissue here. This is a gatefold, and as I say, a lot of you on my channel are quite happy about the resurgence of vinyl. There is no better way to experience proper music than to experience it on vinyl. And you know, they say vinyl's coming back, and that's a good thing, but forgive me if I say a lot of music these days does not deserve to be printed on vinyl, because it's just a waste of vinyl. So sorry. So we all know the history of Depeche Mode, so I'm not going to delve too deeply into the actual history. There is a great documentary which I'm going to place a link to in the description below, which is the sort of Speak and Spell series. You may have seen it before, and that is a very good documentary, about Speak and Spell. But let's look at my perspectives on this. So, recorded in 1981 in Blackwing Studios in London, and it was produced by Depeche Mode and Daniel Miller, and engineered by Eric Radcliffe and John Fryer. So Daniel Miller talks about how he picked up the phone and rang Blackwing Studios, and Eric himself answered the phone. And Daniel did talk about how I think he was a little bit nervous, a little bit dubious about making this record, only because you must remember at this time, records were not made in this way. Depeche Mode were very much forerunners, and the first to sort of do it in this way. Of course, there was electronic music before that, but Depeche Mode, in my opinion, were the first sort of electronic act to sort of make it less of an avant-garde and more sort of poppy. Before that you had, Kraftwerk and all those, and it was all very serious and artsy. Whereas with Depeche Mode, they kind of proved, well, you can have all that high-tech electronic sound, but you can also deliver it with great songs and in a sort of pop fashion. So instead of being all arty-farty and the are the robots, of course, no offense to Kraftwerk, but Depeche Mode really did prove that if you take that electronic sound and marry it with great pop songs, as Vince Clarke used to write, with a great front man, that electronic music does have a place, and indeed it can work. So going into the studio to make their records, bearing in mind at the time, the four boys from Basildon, they still had day jobs. Vince Clarke, I believe, was unemployed and on the dole. I think Martin Gore was working at a bank, and I think Fletch was working at a bank as well, and I think Dave Gahan was a fashion student. So the four boys from Basildon, along with Daniel Miller, went into Blackwing Studios with their synthesizers, and I'm going to run you through the synthesizer list here. Right, so Vince Clarke had a Kawai 100F, and guys, remember, these were analog synthesizers, and it is amazing when you listen to this record, if you know how difficult it was to achieve a good sound back in those days, and this is even before my time. I've had a go on analog synthesizers, and I'm by no means a synthesis guru, but I can tell you what, these were the days where it was really, really difficult. So if you can pull off something like this back in 1981 with the equipment they had, I'm here to tell you, and anyone who's older will also tell you, that this is a bit of sonic genius, based on that time. So Vince Clarke has his Kawai 100F, Daniel Miller contributed a ARP 2600, and Vince Clarke talks about how that was a great help, because he said that the ARP 2000, using the ARP 2600 ensured that things could remain in time. Daniel also contributed a Roland SH1, and Daniel also contributed a Korg Mini 700S. Martin Gore's was a Yamaha CS5, Fletch was a Moog Prodigy, and Vince Clarke also had a Roland Jupiter 4. The drum machine was a Korg KR55. We all know it from "Sometimes once you walk the street at midnight." Pretty boy. The sequencing was done on a Roland MC4 microcomposer, and I do actually own a Roland MC50 Mark II microcomposer, which came out I think in about 1992, which is the more modern version of that, but obviously that album was sequenced on the MC4, and the tape machine they used was a Revox A77, which is a legendary tape machine. And that was the gear list, guys, a very simplistic way of doing it. And as Daniel said, the way they recorded it was, instead of re-synthesizing everything from the ground up, it was really just get them into a studio and get them to lay down the songs the way they played them live. And that's what gives this album such an honest sound. If I can use a metaphor or a crude analogy here, we all know about the guys who say they went clubbing and they come home with this gorgeous girl, and they wake up in the morning and all her makeup's off, and they're like, "Oh my god, who's that?" There is relevance to this, guys. So what I'm trying to point out to you is, this is almost like a, you know, you get these beautiful women like Penelope Cruz or Beyonce, they've got that kind of natural look, they don't need much makeup. And the reason I'm using that metaphor is it's a little bit like Speak and Spell. Speak and Spell are like those beautiful women that have that natural beauty and don't need much makeup. And just for the record, ladies, if you think I'm picking on you, I've worn makeup for photo shoots and various reasons in my life, and yeah, I too look a lot better with makeup, so I'm not picking on you. But you understand what I mean. This is a very honest album. There's no sort of atmospheric sounds and, you know, sort of like, you know, the real sort of Depeche Mode atmospheric sounds. The sound of Speak and Spell is really drums, bass, melody and sequence. It's very honest. It was really, as Daniel Miller said, it was recording the four boys from Basildon as they played it live, you know, the synthesizer sounds that they used and everything. And of course, as I say, Daniel did add his ARP 2600 and the SH1 and the micro Korg. But these were fundamentally the sounds that the four boys from Basildon themselves had cultivated. So it was a very, very honest performance, and that is why when you listen to the Speak and Spell album and you listen to the live performances of that time, the live performances sound very close to the original. And that is because the presets that, or the sounds that they'd made on their own synthesizers were pretty much the sounds that they put straight onto the record. So Speak and Spell is a very honest sounding record. It's a really fresh-faced, eyes wide open kind of record, and honest and direct and no bullshit. It's just a brilliant debut album, a really, really good debut album. Now what I'm going to do is, guys, I'm going to run you through some of the songs now. I've got a few mock-up backing tracks here, and let's just geek out as we run through this brilliant debut album from one of the best electronic bands of all time. The album kicks off with New Life. New Life is a synth pop genius record, as are many of the songs on this album. 157 BPM, energetic, major keys, very, very Erasure sounding. Now many of you have insisted that this is essentially an Erasure album, and it is. Vince Clarke wrote all the songs except for Tora Tora and Big Muff, and it's very interesting if you listen to Tora Tora and Big Muff. I love that name, Big Muff. If you listen to Tora Tora and Big Muff, those sounds have a completely different tone and vibe to the rest of the album. And I was actually surprised because Photographic is another song which I thought it's a really sort of Martin Gore kind of style. But anyway, so New Life. So New Life starts off with an awesome little and it's got this and you're straight into it. No stand still stepping on the shady streets. You're straight into it. It's just bang, it hits you straight beyond it. It's just straight in between the eyes. Put the record on, put the needle down, and boom, you're in. Fantastic start for an album. What separates these songs from sort of modern Depeche Mode, or indeed modern electronic music, was in those days there were so many like played melodies and motifs throughout songs, whereas these days, if you listen to like, and we don't want to get sidetracked now, but if you listen to like a song like Where's the Revolution, it's almost like where's the melody? Come on Martin, you're letting me down. There are not many sort of like melodies and motives. It's all kind of like one big soundscape, and I'm not criticizing it because the way music production has changed, but there is a wonderful sweetness and a awesomeness about 80s music, how everything is like a little melody. So with the New Life, you've got the do 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 do, and then of course you've also got the beautiful how every song has had so many little melodies going, and that is one of the reasons why back in those days, because there were so many melodies, everyone seemed to be doing something, whereas fast forward to the present days, no offense Fletch, because there are not so many melodies in the music. It just means that you're having to do things like, you know, it's not that, anyway. Separate subject.
Complicating, circulating, new life, operating, generating, new life.
Pop genius. The second track is a track called I Sometimes Wish I Was Dead, and I always thought that was so funny because you read, when you first read it, I sometimes wish I was dead, and then the track comes on and it's I don't know why, although it's a Vince Clarke song, I just get the feel that maybe because it started off with a track called New Life, maybe this song was initially meant to be called something like, I don't know what it was meant to be called, but I'm sure for some reason Martin Gore said, oh, I think we should call it I Sometimes Wish I Was Dead. And Vince would be like, no, we can't call it that. And Martin's like, no, we should call it that because, you know, Martin's a little bit more downbeat. I don't know why, I just get the idea that Martin named the song, even though he didn't write it. I don't know why I think that. Anyway, let's run through this.
New sound all around, you can hear the tune. Getting hot, never stop, just for me and you. Playing on my radio and saying that you have to go.
It has all those erasure, all those little sounds. I mean, how can you not smile when you listen to the song? And it's called Sometimes I Wish I Was Dead. It's a bit crazy. The third track is Puppets, and Puppets is one of my favorite songs. So many great melodies, and I just love the vibe of it. It's quite a sexy song. It's probably the sexiest song on the album. It's kind of like I don't know why, but it reminds me of that, hey pretty ladies around the world, got a real thing to show you sometime, other boys and girls. Of course it doesn't sound like that, but it's that kind of, it's like, I'll be your operator, baby, I'm in control. It's very sexy. I really like the song. Brilliant ideas. It kicks off with and of course these parts would all be sequenced into the MC4 microcomposer and then all played back onto the reel-to-reel machine. But let's run through this song and some of the melodies. The iconic and main melody that runs through that is this. This is just pure synth pop genius. When it gets to the middle eighth, it's got another iconic melody. Synth pop genius. So in the context of the mix, it goes as follows.
I'll be your operator, baby, I'm in control.
And then when it gets to the middle eighth,
Boys say go! Boys say go!
pretty much just a filler track. Nothing special. Certainly not as bad as Hey, You're Such a Pretty Boy. And it does also have the word boy in it, so there's something about this album. Any song that has the word boy in it is not very good. But yeah, moving swiftly on. Track number 4 is called No Disco, and the only way I can describe this track is it's an Erasure track with a Dave Gahan vocal. I mean, this track is so Erasure.
This ain't no disco and you know how to dance. This ain't no disco.
Hey, hey, what's your name?
Hey, you're such a pretty boy. Hey, you're such a pretty boy. You're so pretty.
Yeah, what were they thinking? This song always receives a lot of criticism, but you've got to bear in mind the sincerity and the innocence. And 1981. My God, how many years ago was that? So I'm a lot more critical of, as you will see as we get on deeper into the album review series. I mean, songs like
We are the dead of night. We're in the zombie room.
I mean, what the fuck was that all about? I mean, at least this had a sincerity about it, so I cannot be too critical on this song. But yeah, it does kind of suck, and they are pretty embarrassed about it. And moving swiftly on, we come to the first track of side 2, which is Photographic, which is probably my favorite song on this album. It's an absolutely iconic song, and as I say, if you look back at one of my previous videos where I talked about the Live in Hamburg series, I ran through some of the parts on that video, and also went on to say that the Depeche Mode Live in Hamburg concert in 1984 is definitely iconic Depeche Mode, and it was definitely the best version of Photographic they've ever done. Photographic had a very sort of grown-up, sort of sophisticated, a very sort of German sound to it. I don't know if that makes any sense. A very serious, we are the robots, very, very serious. And I absolutely love that song. It's made up of so many iconic parts. In no particular order. There's the and then there's the I take pictures, photographic pictures, and then and also an awesome bass riff. And of course that would have been programmed into the sequencer. And then behind that they'd have also programmed into the sequencer. Tora Tora Tora, probably the darkest song on that album, very serious, and this, as I say, was the first sort of Martin Gore song on this album, and the tone is very different, and I like. It's quite funny if you listen to the track listing on this album, as it ends with "Hey, you're such a pretty boy," and then when we get to the beginning of side 2 and we've got Photographic and then Tora Tora, the tone does really change, and I do like Tora Tora a lot.
They were raining from the sky.
You know, a song about the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. Very dark subject matter. But this is Gore's writing. Martin Gore is not, hey baby, what's your name and tell me, or hey, what's your name? He's very serious. His songwriting's very about real things, and you know, some people call it depressing and dark, but he is just that type of songwriter. So Tora Tora, down, 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 down. Very atmospheric, probably one of the most atmospheric tracks on this album. Very grown-up subject matter. A really, really good song. They then go on to do Big Muff. Why don't you just play it on the keyboard, Vaughan? Why are you making those sounds? Well, guys, I actually haven't had the time to synthesize those sounds because I figured I could go. It's a bit of an 80s action movie. I love it. And why is it called Big Muff? Answers on a postcard, please. We then get Any Second Now, which was Martin's debut ballad. Obviously written by Vince Clarke. This song has a really kind of Erasure type of sound, obviously, because it's a Vince Clarke song. I'm going to illustrate the song to you on the piano just to sort of show you, I want to compare it to an Erasure song just to show you what I mean. So it's, and then it's, she remembered all the shadows and the doubts the same found. It does remind me a lot of that song from Erasure, where it goes, I try hard to put you out of my mind. See it? Every night alone I'm thinking about you. How can I avoid the pain? Similar. She remembered all the shadows and the dots the same found. Thought I'd just draw the comparison there, but it is very obvious when you listen to this album, as some of you have said, it is fundamentally an Erasure album. And I love this ballad. I love Martin's voice on it. I love the sentiment. They just did not make a single mistake with this song. It's absolutely the sentiment and everything. It's gold. Absolutely love this ballad. Well done, guys. That was brilliant. The next track is Just Can't Get Enough. Personally, I've had enough of that track. Yeah, I think we all have. Love it. We give it the respect it's due, but I'm not going to actually cover it. Just Can't Get Enough. And that was probably the biggest hit from the album. Just Can't Get Enough is synth pop genius. It'll go down in history. It's an earworm. It's one of those songs, even if you weren't a fan, you'd probably hate it, but you'd still love it because it just was so incredibly infectious. And the genius behind Vince Clarke, who definitely deserves a video on his own, his genius cannot be understated. Love him or loathe him, Vince Clarke is just a genius. Final track, Dreaming of Me. And Dreaming of Me was, I believe, their first single, and that made it up to, was it number 57 in the charts? Which Daniel Miller even said was, you know, quite a success story, because I don't think he'd ever had anything in the charts, or he'd never have anything that high in the charts. And of course Daniel Miller was, you know, more sort of like underground and not really commercial. So for them to get number 57 in the charts with Dreaming of Me was a tremendous breakthrough. Dreaming of Me. I love that. It's got a real sort of like 70s kind of almost like ghost ball, I don't know, some kind of spooky. Dreaming of Me is a great track. It has such a sort of like an uplifting, feel good. I love the spooky woo woo, And then the melody is really just... It's really simple and very naive, but you know, it's great little song. And that, my friends, concludes the track listing for Speak and Spell. All in all, I really enjoyed this album. You know, as a debut album, I think it was brilliant. You know, as we interviewed Brian Griffin a few weeks ago and we talked about the album cover. Of course, the album cover was... They really didn't get it at the time, but looking at it now, it's just a piece of iconic artwork. And what I loved about albums in those days is the amount of attention to detail and effort that went into the artwork. I very often find now, in this age of content is king that we're living in, it's like, you know, artists will do a song and it's like, okay, we need a cover now. Yeah. Chick, take a photo. Yeah, that'll do. Yeah, put it out. And unfortunately, that's just the sort of churn and burn consumer culture that we're in at the moment. But I do really appreciate these times where things were kind of done a little bit slower and a lot more attention to detail. So if you're a younger fan and you're doing electronic music and stuff, you know, guys, these records, you can learn a lot from these records. I know they sound naive and a little bit unsophisticated in today's standards, but if you have to put yourself back in the mindset of the time, and they were groundbreaking. And I mean, you listen to it now, it's, you know, the mix and the balance and the way it's done, it was really well. You know, it's brilliant. As I say, I love the honest, eyes wide open feel of this album. It is really, as I say, it's like that girl who's not wearing makeup but she's still beautiful. There's not much processing on this, from what I can tell. To me, it sounds, it's really honest. It's like, as Daniel Miller said, it was recording them as they would play it live. So it was just the presets that, or the sounds that they had generated themselves, going straight into the sequencer and then onto tape. So yeah, it's very honest. And you know, I don't think there's much compression and EQ, and there's definitely not much processing on this. It is a very well-rounded, brilliant album. And as I say, you know, back in the Geek Talk series, how we talk about how, you know, so many distractions these days actually cause you to make worse records. I mean, we can take it back to this time where, as I mentioned, the kit list they had in the beginning, how simple it was. But you know, guys, always come back to these albums if you're a producer and just listen to the simplicity and the sentiment and how they got it right with what they had. And as I say, I think technology is a great thing, but it is kind of like a nemesis. It's kind of like an enemy to us at the same time. But anyway, that's a subject for the Geek Talk series. Right, guys, so I'm now going to run through those 5 questions that I'm going to ask myself and give you the answer, and then I'm going to ask you to answer these questions as well. Point number 1, if I was to lose a track from this album, which one would it be? I think that's easy. I would say it would definitely be Hey Hey, What's Your Name? Yeah, we always pick on that song. I would have liked to have seen Ice Machine on the album. I know Ice Machine is sort of like on the, if you buy a digital album, it will be on there. But I mean, my album reviews are based on the vinyls, which are this, you know, the sort of definitive release. And yeah, I think Ice Machine would have been a much better choice. But anyway, whatever they've chosen to go by here, this will always go. This is legendary. I really love this. So yes, the one track that I would choose to lose from this album, if I had to lose a track, would be definitely What's Your Name. Secondly, question number 2 is, which do I think is the most radical track on this album? And certainly to me, the most radical track on this album is Big Muff. It's just radical. You know, I think in close second place there was probably just the way it bounces and the song title of it. But anyway, remaining on topic, question 2 is, which do I think is the most radical track? I think definitely Big Muff. Question 3, which song have I listened to most on this album? Now guys, this came out in 1981, and I think I got into Depeche Mode in about 1990, and I probably bought this album in about 1992. So, And I think the song that I listened to the most on this album was probably Just Can't Get Enough. And as a result, I've just had enough. Which leads me on to question 4, which is my favorite song on this album now. I would definitely say, without a doubt, Photographic. It's interesting when you have these, you know, when you have an album like this that forms a part of your life, they become like your children and you get to love them. But you'll find as time progresses, you sort of, when you listen to it again with a fresh perspective, you tend to favor certain songs over the others, but you love them all, except for What's Your Name. So yeah, I think, to me, Photographic is my favorite song on this album. Now, the question, what am I going to rate this? As I said to you, taking all the mitigating factors into account, this was a debut album, they hadn't been around for a long time, enjoyability, and all these things taken on into account. Guys, my personal rating for Speak and Spell, I'm going to give Speak and Spell 7 out of 10. I do love it. And giving these albums a rating is pretty difficult, you know, when you're taking all... I don't rate it just on enjoyability. I don't sort of listen to it and go, oh. There are so many factors that I've taken into account, you know, bearing in mind that they were new, this was a debut album, all these things. And at the end of the day, it's just my personal opinion. So guys, I'd like you to leave your comments below and answer the 5 questions that I answered. And the first question is, if you were to lose a track from this album, which track would you lose? Question 2, which track do you think is the most radical track on this album? Question 3, which song have you listened to the most on this album? Question number 4, which song do you now like the most on this album? Which is your favorite song on this album at the moment? And question number 5, what would you rate this album? What would you rate Speak and Spell out of 10? Guys, I've really enjoyed this album review. This is the first one. I've got to go back and edit it now. I look forward to doing the second one, which will be obviously A Broken Frame, and then we're going to get Brian Griffin in again to discuss the artwork behind A Broken Frame. Guys, thank you so much as always. If this is your first time to the channel, I would like to invite you to subscribe, click like, and share this video with anyone who you think would appreciate it. Also, there is a Vaughan George Facebook group, which is growing, you know, steadily, with some great discussions, some really like-minded members. I'd like to invite you to join that. Links to everything I've discussed are in the description below. And guys, as always, I want to thank you so much for your support and your interest in the channel, and I will see you on the next video. Be awesome, and I'll see you again. See you later.